Okay, so this is our second tutorial in Autodesk Takeoff. At this stage, we're just getting used to how the product works, and we're just taking off quantities. So to reiterate what this product is and what it's not, it's a product for pure quantity takeoff. So the stuff you're doing with Figure in relation to building up descriptions and to using then, I suppose, measurements within those descriptions, this is not what this does. This essentially does your raw takeoff. So you might take off your gross floor area, you might take off certain areas of different floors, you might take off your internal walls, but those quantities then have to be used within a description. So we're not creating descriptions as such, we're just creating takeoff that we can utilize then in an actual bill of quantities description or a cost plan description somewhere down the line. So this is just pure takeoff tool. It's like just to aid your measurement. You're not using a scale rule, you're not using a calculator, you're not using BuildSoft, you're not using Cupid, which is essentially kind of a takeoff tool and a cost tool. This is just purely a takeoff tool. So what you're doing with Figure kind of stands on its own. This is just kind of aiding you doing some takeoff and getting you a feel for what on-screen takeoff is all about. So we're going to continue on where we left off. Last week, if I just click the little, see that little eye there? If I click that back on and I'm in the right drawing, and of course I am in the right drawing because this is where I left off, I'll see both those measurements I took off last week. Now this one, the internal walls I just started, just to give you an example. We're going to delete that in a second because we're going to start again. But certainly the ground floor area, in this case, should be in around 68 meters squared. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is turn off or at least delete this internal walls measurement. I'll come back to it again. It's just that I kind of start to do and just show you what a length measurement was like. But I'm going to click on the little three dots there on the right hand side. I can edit the measurement here. Again, as I said before, I can click the eye, which kind of turns off the measurement on screen. It doesn't delete the measurement, but it'll just turn it off in terms of its view. But in this case, I'm going to delete it. Okay, so I'm going to delete the internal walls. It'll ask me, do I want to delete it? And I do. So the only takeoff really, I suppose, we did last week in terms of setting up the drawing and starting our takeoff was that ground floor area. Now the other area I want to take off is just a simple drawing, and you can look through the drawings by clicking on the sheets and models up here on the left hand side. So those drawings that you added, once I click that, I have access to them. Now, as I said before, I bookmarked a few. Some of the ones I want to, that I want to have at the top. I don't have to be scrolling down all the time, looking through 13 drawings. So I bookmarked first floor plan, ground floor plan, and you can turn off or on any other of the drawings here. So I'm going to bookmark this little plus here on the right hand side of the drawing. I'm going to bookmark that side elevation. So the next drawing I want to look at is my first floor plan. So I'm going to click that. So to do that, obviously, sheets and models, first floor plan. And there it is there. Now I have it scaled here, but the chances are if you're looking at it for the first time, you don't have it scaled. So we've got a lot of dimensions here that we can scale off. So how do we do that? Now this one's coming in as 1:98. You probably haven't scaled that already, but let's go ahead and do that. So let's pick a known dimension and click down here and calibrate. Now up at the top of the drawing, it'll probably say, in your case, because I've already done it, it's drawing not scaled. So keep an eye on that. If you haven't scaled the drawing, that's the first thing you need to do. So I'm going to click calibrate. I'll click that little button there. Select 2 points to calibrate the drawing. So get this little A that comes up here. I'm going to click the home in here, make sure I get zoom in, make sure I get right on the dot, right in the middle. And then I can zoom out again if I want to. 2850, so I'll come across and I'll zoom in. So you might have to push down your mouse wheel as you kind of move from one side to the other. Again, I get that. You'll get used to this. And click, what did I say it was? Hopefully I can remember, 2850. And click calibrate. Now, that's calibrated. It's still 1:98, so I had that correct. If I want to double check another measurement, I can click the little measure here, quick measure. And maybe I'll just check this vertical measurement there. Click on that, come down, hover over it, 974.99. So it's dead right. And then click escape to get rid of that. So over time, don't worry if you start making mistakes. This is just practice, and we're going to do quite a bit of this over the next number of weeks. You'll get used to how to unroll mistakes, whether it be Control Z, hold down Control and pressing Z on your keyboard, or clicking escape and then the navigation, the zooming in, zooming out, pushing down on your mouse wheel as you kind of go along the drawing or around the drawing in terms of your takeoff. So we're going to take it nice and slow so that you do get a feel for it. You kind of, it's an intuition as well. Like the more you kind of use it, maybe delete it, start again, try it again, the more you kind of get used to it. So we're not in a bit of we're not in a race here to get proficient at measurement. We're just kind of getting a feel for the software more than anything else. So I'm going to go back. I have my first floor drawing open there. What I might do is just check that section elevation. So click that section elevation and just see what kind of dimensions are on my drawings there. I can see that this is a section through the building. Got a little bit of a one-story extension out the back, or with a lean-to roof. Cavity wall construction, full fill cavity, height of my, let's say my stud partitions or my floor to ceiling on the ground floor is 2442, so 2.442 meters and 2418. Now I can calibrate that drawing if I want. I have it calibrated at 1:77, so I could do a quick calibration. Calibrate, select 2 points, maybe select that one, and then up, and then select this one. Where is it? It's right there. And then that one was, what did I say? 2442. Calibrate. So, well, that comes up with 1:78. I could probably agree 1:77 or 1:78 if I want to double check a measurement, just to make sure I'm okay. So click on one. Once I've calibrated it, hover over, and that says 2452. Well, I'm a little bit, yeah, thereabouts. So I'm happy enough with that. It's a small house, so if I'm out or slightly out in terms of my scale, it won't make a whole lot of difference. But for the most part, I'll take the dimensions as is rather than measuring them if they're available. So I'm going to go back. I've done, I suppose, all those 3 drawings scale now, the ones that are bookmarked. You can go ahead and scale every single one of them if you want, or calibrate them as the right term. But for the moment, that's all I'm going to be using. Go back to my takeoff. First of all, I want to click on my first floor plan. I'm going to measure my first floor area. So that's obviously the area, or the floor plan has the bathrooms and ensuite, etc. on the first floor. So I'm moving off the ground floor plan on my first floor plan, and then I'm going to go back to my takeoff types. So I'm back in here now. So I've opened up that first floor plan. It's available for me on the view, and then back into my takeoff. Now, you'll notice because I'm out of the ground floor plan, that takeoff won't be available there. I won't see it. Now, there's parts of this product that I don't particularly like. There's certainly parts of it that are very useful, especially that it's a web tool and I'm on my browser here rather than in any sort of specific software on my computer, which leads to issues in relation to losing work, and this saves as it goes along, so it's quite handy, but it's certainly not as a robust tool as something like Costex is, or something like Cupid is on your own machine. But for what we need and what we need to do in terms of learning how to do on-screen takeoff, doesn't really matter what tool we use, and this one's very useful, the fact that it is a web browser. Okay, so starting with this, or continuing on essentially where we left off, I'm in a different floor, in the first floor rather than the ground floor. As I said before, that's not there because it's, or at least the takeoff isn't there or showing because it's not on the ground floor takeoff. In fact, if I change back, by clicking sheets and models, click my ground floor, went back to my takeoff, you'd see that takeoff type is back now, and you'd see it there. That's not what I'm looking for to do, so I'm going to click sheets and models, I'm going to click first floor plan, I'm going to click back to my takeoff types. You'll get used to this kind of flicking between the different, I suppose, modes here on the left hand side, whether it's takeoff mode or where you're selecting. Those of you that are quite used to dealing with programs, computer programs, are a little bit more proficient with computers than others will find this a little bit easier, more intuitive, whereas you might have to build up your intuition if you're not used to it. But certainly over months, if not a couple of years of doing this stuff over the next course of the couple of years you're going to be in college, and as well as that out in your workplace, and you'll be doing something similar, you'll develop the skills for this, and it's quite transferable from one product to the next. We're looking at on-screen takeoff as opposed to kind of, I suppose, 3D modeling. And again, as I said before, no matter what product you're using, it's quite similar. So we've done the ground floor area. It's not shown there, as I said, because we're not in the ground floor. Click the little plus here, create a takeoff type. So let's create a first floor area. Now I tend to, this is a kind of good measurement practice, I don't tend to create, let's say, a takeoff called gross floor area, and then within the gross floor area measure everything together. I essentially create different floor area measurements. Same when I do internal walls, same when I measure anything. If I'm measuring it off a floor, I say what floor it's on and then obviously what measurement type it is. You'll see what I mean as we go through a number of these tutorials here. So again, the tool here, is it an area? As I hover over it, linear, is it a count, is it a BIM? It's not a BIM measurement, obviously, it's an area again. It'll default to a different color, which is fine. You can select a different color there if you want. You can give it a description. No need to give it a description right now. Classification. Okay, so what output, or I suppose what classification do I want to put it in? I'm going to drop down. I'm going to select the classification structure, which is the National Standard Building Elements. It's not in the substructure. It would be more like, I suppose, floors and galleries here. Now, it's 2.3, but it's really 23. It's just the way it's kind of gone in. I just couldn't put in a coding structure that was per the National Standard Building Elements exactly, so I just kind of put a point in between what would be 23, 2.3. Click that. This, for the most part, doesn't really matter a whole lot. Obviously important, and I have to put it in, but in terms of creating a takeoff, I'm not necessarily creating a bill of quantities, so I just need something to, I suppose, guide me in relation to where I put my measurement, and I suppose this is as good as anything. It's not a count. I'm going to drop down there and select what it is. It's a measure of an area, square meter measurement. Okay, and then I'm going to scroll down, and I think I have everything in there I need to. It's going to go in floors and galleries. It's essentially a first floor. It's going to be measured as meters squared. I've got my meter squared area measured there, and then I'm going to either save or start takeoff. So I can save it and just leave it as is and move on to creating another takeoff. I can select start takeoff, and I'm given this little plus icon here, and I'm also down here defaulted into this area on the bottom, and I want to go ahead and measure this. Okay, my first floor. So there's my takeoff. It's asking me to start my takeoff. Again, kind of similar to what I did with my ground floor. I'm going to zoom in on one corner. Again, there could be two lines there signifying that I've got a little bit of plaster. I'll start on the inside. Now you can zoom right in and you'll get, from a pixelated point of view, you're kind of, I suppose, getting a blob. So I can see that's probably about right there. So I started my takeoff by clicking on my left mouse button. Now I can kind of zoom in and zoom out. As I said before, I can zoom out a little bit and then as I move across, zoom in. Or I can just kind of hover over the right hand side of the page and it kind of moves around. So I'll zoom in there a little bit and then I'll kind of pull down, and as I hover over the bottom of the page it kind of goes down. I can zoom out at the same time, or I can push down on my mouse wheel and kind of, rather than, don't push on any of your buttons, push down your mouse wheel, and it kind of lets you navigate around the drawing. So I'm just essentially, you've tried this before, you can see that I've zoomed out to the context there to see exactly what I'm measuring. Come across, zoom in. The zoom out, zoom in is quite handy. So click, zoom out, and then as I move up, I can even actually pull down, zoom in on this corner, zoom out, zoom in on this corner, zoom out, and I've pretty much got that done there. Now I can go up to the top and click, or I can just click enter, and that's now my area of my first floor. So 52.46, and I can't see my ground floor area there. I would have to click my ground floor to see what it is, but essentially I've measured both my first floor and my ground floor. So I suppose moving on from that, what else could I measure? Again, we started this last week. I know we deleted it, but let's look at measuring maybe some of my internal walls, just to give you an idea how you might do a linear length measurement, and then multiply it by a height to get I suppose, a wall area. We'll do external walls at a later time and maybe start with the internal walls because they're a little bit easier. Obviously, doors and sanitary ware are quite easy in terms of counts. We'll get to that, but they're pretty self-explanatory in relation to setting up a count and pointing and clicking. So let's add another measurement here. Okay, well, let's first of all move off that drawing because let maybe start with the ground floor. Okay, so I'm going to click Sheets of Models up at the top here, click my ground floor plan. What have I measured already on that? The area. So I'm going to measure some internal walls. I want to get the height of these internal walls first. So what I need to do is maybe look at one of my sections. I bookmark I bookmarked the section elevation, so let's click on that. And my ground floor, and this is why I like having individual measurements per floor, so internal walls on the ground floor, internal walls on the first floor. If there was a second floor, I'd measure them separately because they've got possibly different heights. So this particular height, let's say, of my stud partition, here you can see it goes from obviously ground floor level. It has a little foundation or a little rising wall that will be measured as part of the substructure, not part of the internal walls. It'll be measured as a little rising wall in the substructure. So anything above the ground floor level is part of my internal walls, and it goes from ground floor level up to the underside of my ceiling. And the same goes for the first floor. So the stud partitions would go from right here, which would be first floor level, up to the underside of my ceiling of my roof. So in this case, I've got a first floor height of 2.418 and a ground floor height of 2.442. So I'll remember that. 2.442 or 2.442. I'm going to go back to my ground floor. I'm going to click on my takeoff, and I'm going to actually maybe turn off that takeoff eye there by clicking it. Now it's not, takeoff hasn't gone away. I can still see it there, 68.02. It's just grayed out. I'm going to create a new takeoff here by clicking the plus on the right hand side, and I'm going to say internal walls dash ground floor, because as I said, I'm going to keep them separate. I'm going to measure, I have the option of measuring it as an area. Now you might think I'm going to measure these because they're an area, but if you selected area, it's area on surface, not area as in vertical area. So it has to be measured if it's a wall as a linear length. We'll get to the area now in a second. It's certainly not a count and it's not a bin model. So I'm going to click linear. So it's a linear measurement. Now you're looking for a linear measurement times a height. So we'll get to that in a second. And what I need to do is put it in an output. So classification again, in this case would be superstructure and not floors and galleries, not external walls, obviously 22 internal walls and partitions. And it defaults to count. I'm not counting anything here. I'm actually looking for drop down a square meters output. So we'll get to this in a second. Once I click, now I could measure it as a meter calculation, but because I need to get a total area of my internal walls, once I click this square meterage, this input or this secondary output comes up. Now if I didn't do that, you notice that that wouldn't be there. So I don't have a secondary output because I'm looking for it as a, I suppose, a linear length. It's measured as in meters, whereas this one, if I click square meters, in comes this secondary output. Now it's looking for a height. So what was the height of my wall on ground floor level? So I'm measuring from the ground floor up to the underside of the ceiling, and I said it's 2.442. Wasn't it something like that, or 2.4? I could say it's millimeters here now, but I'm going to just leave it as meters. Okay, so 2.442 of a meter is obviously 2,442 millimeters, which is fine. So either or, you can put it in as millimeters, you can put it in as meters, and it should still work. So let's start my takeoff. Now, start takeoff, and I'm back to my little plus, and I'm back to zooming in and zooming out. And it's slightly different here in terms of measurement. So I've got some internal walls on the ground floor. This one is a kind of a double stud partition. I'll measure that separately because what they're using there is essentially they're using a double stud partition for a sliding door that goes into the cavity of that stud. So it's a slider stud partition. So I'm not going to measure that because it's not part of the ordinary stud partitions we have here. They're calling it a structural stud, but we're just going to measure it as basic internal walls. Now, usually what I do is when I'm measuring this stuff, I measure along one side of the wall, and that's probably good practice. So let's do that. Others might find it a little bit easier to measure through the center of the stud wall, but I tend to measure along one side. Now, with this product, I don't like the way that you'll see in a second that the actual lines are quite thick, but don't let that put you off. So if I'm measuring this stud wall, I suppose from this side to this outer side here, I'm going to measure along one side. So clicking maybe the actual stud itself. There you go. Now you see what I see. You see what I mean when it's a very kind of thick line. And I'm going to come all the way to the end. Now you'll notice that the round bit is coming out, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. And then I've clicked on that bit. Now it wants to extend here, but I'm going to click enter, and it measures that as a length. So it's measured it. And it's put it in there as a kind of 4.67 meters squared. So the next one, that line essentially covers me to the very end there, and I'm going to start this one right here, and I'm going to come up, measure through my door because I'll deduct them out at another time, and come all the way down to, let's say, right here, say. Okay, and then enter. Zoom out a little bit, maybe start this one over here, and that one then stops, let's say right here. Okay, enter. So kind of cover that line on that side, and then this one is going to be from here and then all the way to, that's basically covering that line, so I'm going to stop about here. Enter. So now it's kind of coming together there in terms of what I've measured. Maybe I'll go from, again, it just depends on the way you measure this, but I go from there to there. Enter. Now that line, again, it's a big blob. I'd rather it was a thinner line, but I'm measuring kind of inside to outside. Starting here, that line covers it right to there. I want to start right here, and I come all the way down to, measure through my walls. I come right down to where that last stud is. You'll see that there's a double stud at the end where it meets the external walls. So I'll kind of cover myself there. And do I have all the internal walls measured? I do, apart from this one here, which I'll measure separately. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening. This probably wall does extend a little bit underneath the stairs. I'm not sure. I don't have an elevation, so I've just stopped it there for the moment. That's okay. We're just getting a feel for our measurement. I measured through all my doors. I've just got to make a note of that when I do actually use this measurement, that I've got to deduct those door opes. Why do I measure through my door opes? A lot of students make the mistake where they stop at the edges of their doors and they don't include their door area. And the reason being is because if I did that, I'd be essentially assuming that the door goes all the way up to the ceiling. And as you guys know, doors don't go all the way up to the ceiling. They're about 2.1 high. And if I did that, I'd miss that bit of wall that was above my door. So I always measure through my opes and then deduct them. Now, in some software, there's ways to deduct out the opes. This one, because it's kind of an online tool, really, I don't think they've figured out how to do that. There is a way, I've kind of figured out, but I'll essentially worry about that when I actually use that takeoff in my bill of quantities. And then I'll just count my doors times the door area and deduct it out of my takeoff. So I'm happy enough with that. That's my first floor area, my internal wall area on the ground floor. And I think I've pretty much everything covered. So what you might want to do then is, that's that kind of, I suppose, done for the moment. I might want to create a new takeoff on my first floor. So just to remind myself, looking at the section elevation, what was my height of my first floor walls, internal walls, 2418. Click back on my sheets and models again, and click my first floor. There it is there. Click my takeoff types. I'm going to hide that first floor area that I've measured already. I'm going to create a new takeoff type. There we go. Why isn't it clicking? What am I calling it? Internal walls. Same as what I had before, but this time, first floor. Same again. It's going to be linear length. Same again. It's going to be within my substructure and my internal walls. And same again, it's going to be meters squared down here in terms of its output. And then default height was slightly different, wasn't it? 2.418 instead of 2.442. So that's the height of my stud wall from, I suppose, first floor level right up to the underside of the ceiling. And again, I'm going to start my takeoff and measure through my doors. So I'm back in here. All the stuff that's grayed out there is part of the ground floor, so I wouldn't worry about that. Hopefully I'm on the right item here. Let's start my takeoff. Here we are. Just make sure I'm on the internal walls. I've got my little plus sign, so I'm on the right item. And I can go ahead, and you guys can figure this out yourselves if you want. Just to show you how I might make a mistake here. If I went and measured something like down there and went, uh-oh, that's an error, I just hold down Control on my keyboard and press Z. It's gone. Okay? Now you can do that if you make an error, just delete it. Or you can kind of see, does escape work? Escape works sometimes if you haven't completed your measurement. But I'm going to start maybe here. and I'm going to go to the edge of that wall and then hit enter. So that covers that line. I'm going to start at the outer edge of my wall here, and I'm going to go to maybe just down to here. You don't have to follow exactly the sequence I'm using here, but I'm covering my walls. Maybe start right here at the edge of this stud partition, go through those doors. If I go all the way through there to the very end, and that covers that wall, hit enter. Okay. Then I might cover this wall, starting at that corner, and then all the way down, because I stopped there with this one, I want to come bring this one all the way down to there, hit enter. And that covers that one. What else have I got here? I've got this one right from his corner all the way across. I might stop here, hit enter, and then I might do this one to here, click enter, it covers that. And then you see the way I'm kind of going from inside, then I'll come to outside. Again, this is just practice. If you're not exactly getting this, you'll notice that it doesn't make a massive difference. You might double measure a corner. And for the moment, in terms of getting a bit of practice, that's okay. I'll go from there to there. There we go. What else have I got left? Zoom out. I've got here to, let's say, here, hit enter. And then from maybe here to here. Now you can see, click enter again. So let's say I made a mistake there. I can just hit Control Z and that one goes away and maybe redo it again. Or I can go Control Z again and it'll redo the previous step. So Control Z, Control Z is your friend in terms of maybe doing this. So what have I covered there? Pretty much everything except this last one here. I'm going to go from here because I covered that in that line. I'm going to just take this one down to right the way down to here. If I measured in that line, down to that stud. Okay, there we go. So what have I got there? 58 meters squared. Obviously that doesn't include the door oaks, or it does include the door oaks as I measured them through, and I'll take them at another time. So if I wanted to kind of show my little first floor area as well, I could click that eye, and for that particular drawing, about 52 meters squared, or nearly 53 meters squared in floor area, first floor area, and 58.01 in internal wall length. So I think for the moment, in terms of measuring some areas, measuring some lengths, as in internal wall areas that are measured as lengths multiplied by default height, you've kind of got the feel there for what we're doing, and we'll continue on with more measurement in the next tutorial. But I think between this tutorial and your previous tutorial, you know, you've got a good feel for measurements of areas and internal wall lengths. What we might do in the next day, in the next tutorial, is look at measure some of the external walls. Now, as I said before, I don't know if you heard me saying it, you measure everything off the plans. I didn't measure anything off elevations. I didn't measure anything off sections. All I did was take lengths off sections and then utilize them in my area. So how do you do that for external walls, for example? Well, I'll show you the next day. But I think in terms of playing around with this, by all means, you know, you might have completed this tutorial, you might have completed the last tutorial, but you may play around with this yourself and start measuring even counts, and maybe even try and measure in the roof area or whatnot. You can delete it again, by all means, if you're not happy with it, or if you move on to it and the next day and I've already covered it, or I'm going to cover it, you can delete what you've measured and kind of start again. But for the most part, I think you'll be on the right track if you've completed these measurements. Okay, thanks, and I'll put another video up pretty soon.